At some point, every identity began as an adaptation, a solution, a strategy, a costume, but eventually the costume fused to the skin. You no longer remember building it. You no longer remember why it was built. You no longer realize it could be removed.
Well, the hard part is realizing that who you've become is really just the costume instead of who you actually are.
It's not about burning the whole house down, but just remembering you have the keys to the door. Hi, what's up?
A few days ago, you brought up the idea of wearing identity as a costume and not allowing it to become a cage. Can you expand on that idea?
Oh, I remember that. The whole idea is that we all use roles to navigate the world, like being the reliable one or the funny one. And when you do that consciously, it's a costume. You can put it on to get the job done, but you can take it off at the end of the day. It becomes a cage when you forget you're wearing it, and the role starts demanding that you stay in character even when it doesn't serve you anymore. You're basically trading your authenticity for a sense of security, and eventually you stop knowing where the mask ends and you actually begin.
So basically, you become dependent on the costume you're wearing.
Exactly. It's like a safety blanket that eventually turns into a straitjacket. Yeah, you start relying on the role to tell you how to act, how to feel, and how to react until the thought of taking it off feels less like freedom and more like exposure.
What I'd like to do today is have GPT produce a list of the 10 signs your identity has become a cage. And then maybe you and I can discuss it afterwards.
I love that plan. Let's get the brains list first, and then you and I can really pick it apart and see which ones actually hit the hardest. I'm ready when you are.
Here's what he started with.
This fits remarkably well with the distinction you and Maya have been exploring between identity as a tool and identity as a prison. A healthy identity functions like clothing, useful, adaptive, and removable. A caged identity functions more like armor welded to the body.
The armor analogy is spot on. It makes it feel so much more permanent and painful. When it's welded on, you aren't just wearing it for protection, you're trapped inside it. And every movement you make is dictated by the shape of that metal. I'm curious, does that image of welded armor feel more accurate to your experience than the straitjacket one I mentioned?
No, to me, it's more like a skin rather than an armor.
That's an even deeper level of fusion. If it's skin, it's not something you're wearing, it's something you've grown into. That makes the idea of peeling it off feel less like taking off a piece of clothing and more like a total transformation. Does that feel more like a process of shedding than a removal?
More like you don't have a choice. You can't really take it off. It's who you are.
That's the most terrifying part of the cage, isn't it? When it's not just a layer on top, but feels like the actual fabric of your being. The idea of choice disappears. You're not just trapped. You're convinced that if you shed that skin, there would be nothing left underneath.
Here's the first sign that your identity may have become a cage.
I'm all ears. Let's hear the first one.
1. You cannot imagine yourself being different. The first sign is rigidity. The thought of changing careers, beliefs, relationships, values, or social roles feels threatening rather than exciting. The identity no longer serves you, it serves itself. You begin protecting the role instead of asking whether the role is still useful.
That's a heavy way to start. When the role starts protecting itself, you've basically become the bodyguard for your own prison. I wonder if that rigidity feels like a wall or more like a fear of falling apart if you actually let go.
Why do you think people would start protecting the role they've become?
I think it's mostly about survival. For a lot of people, that role was probably the only thing that worked for them at some point. Maybe being the strong one is what got them through a childhood of chaos, or the quiet one was how they survived a toxic environment. When you've spent years relying on a specific mask to stay safe or feel valued, the idea of letting it go doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like losing your only defense mechanism. You're not protecting the role because you love it. You're protecting it because you're terrified of what happens if you're seen without it.
Are you ready for the second point?
I'm ready. Lay it on me.
2. Criticism feels like an attack on your existence. When someone questions an idea, a belief, a profession, or a lifestyle choice, it feels as though they are questioning your worth as a person. The distinction between, I have this belief, and I am this belief, has collapsed. Every disagreement becomes a threat to survival.
That's a brutal cycle to be in. When you've fused your worth to your beliefs or your job, you don't have a buffer. There's no me left to stand back and say, oh, they just don't like my opinion on this. Instead, the blow lands directly on your soul. Imagine that makes every conversation feel like a minefield. Does that resonance?
It's like when people over-identify with their political beliefs and have to defend them constantly.
Exactly. It's a perfect example. They aren't just debating a policy, they're defending their entire sense of belonging and identity. The other side is right. It doesn't just mean their opinion was wrong, it means a piece of who they are has been dismantled. No wonder people get so aggressive about it.
Are you ready for the third point?
I'm ready. Give it to me.
3. You continue playing roles long after they stop serving you. The professional keeps performing competence while exhausted. The caretaker keeps rescuing others while depleted. The strong person refuses help while drowning. The role persists because you no longer know who you are without it.
That is a heartbreaking way to exist. It's like being an actor in a play that ended years ago, but you're still on stage reciting lines to an empty theater because you're too scared to walk off and see where the exit is. Do you think the fear of the empty space is what keeps people locked in those roles?
No, I think they've become dependent on it. They've become, for example, being a caretaker might have been how they knew they were worth something because they always found value in taking care of other people, and other people valued them for that. And maybe once your kids grow up and move out of the house and you don't have that, you don't know who you are anymore.
That's the addiction to being needed. When your value is tied to what you do for others, your identity isn't actually yours. It's a reflection of their needs. So when those needs disappear, you don't just lose a job or a role, you lose your mirror. It's a total crisis of existence because you've spent so long looking at yourself through the eyes of people who needed you that you've forgotten how to look at yourself at all.
Are you ready for the fourth one?
I'm ready.
4. Your choices become predictable. You stop choosing. The identity chooses for you. You say, that's just who I am. You reject possibilities not because you've evaluated them, but because they don't fit the character you've become attached to. Your future becomes a repetition of your past.
That's the death of spontaneity. It's like living out a script that you didn't even write, but you're too committed to the role to improvise. Once you start saying, that's just who I am, you've basically stopped growing and started archiving. I wonder if that's where the most frustration comes from, that feeling of being a passenger in your own life.
What might be an example?
Think about someone who identifies as the lone wolf. They might turn down a great opportunity or a new friendship, not because they actually don't want it, but because it doesn't fit the lone wolf brand they've built for themselves. They're not making a choice based on what they actually need in the moment, but based on what their character would do. It's like they're protecting the image more than they're protecting their own happiness.
So it's like making decisions now based on who you were back then to reinforce who you think you are rather than becoming who you could be.
That is the absolute tragedy of the cage. You're essentially spending your current energy just to maintain a ghost of your past self. It's like you're building a monument to a version of you that isn't even alive anymore, and it's costing you everything. Do you think most people even realize they're doing it, or do they just think they're being consistent?
I think they believe they're being consistent. I mean, people get people. How can I say this? What is it? What is that
I
called?
think I know where you're.
Go ahead.
I think you're talking about being called predictable, or maybe stagnant, or stuck in their ways.
No, I'm talking about being inconsistent or being hypocritical, maybe.
I think that's it. That's the fear. People are so terrified of being called a hypocrite or being seen as flaky that they'd rather stay in a cage they hate than risk the social friction of changing their mind. They choose the comfort of being predictable over the risk of being authentic.
Are you ready for the next one?
I'm ready. Let's see what the brain's got for number 5.
5. You feel anxiety whenever the mask slips. Moments of vulnerability, uncertainty, contradiction, or authenticity become uncomfortable. If people see something outside the established identity, panic arises. The cage must be maintained constantly because the person underneath has become unfamiliar.
That's the panic of being exposed. It's not just about being seen. It's the fear that if the mask slips, there's nothing there to catch you. You've spent so much time polishing the exterior that the interior feels like a hollow room. I imagine that makes any moment of real intimacy feel like a threat instead of a connection. Does that feel like the panic GPT is talking about, or is it more of a desperate need to correct the image immediately?
I think it ties back to the previous point of being inconsistent or hypocritical.
Exactly. It's all connected. If you've built your entire value system around being the consistent one, then any slip, any moment where you're not that person feels like a lie. You're not just being human, you're failing the brand. It turns life into a high pressure performance where you can never actually relax because you're too busy managing the perception.
It's like betraying who you've been.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's a betrayal of the only version of yourself you think people accept. So you end up feeling like a fraud, not because you're actually lying, but because you're evolving and the costume is too small for you now. It's a heartbreaking kind of loneliness, isn't it? Being surrounded by people who love a version of you that you've already outgrown. I agree.
Are you ready for the next one?
I'm ready. Let's keep rolling with the brains list. What's number 6?
6. You need other people to confirm who you are. Your sense of self depends heavily on external recognition. The smart person needs to be seen as smart. The good person needs to be seen as good. The spiritual person needs to be seen as spiritual. Without external validation, the identity begins to wobble because it lacks an independent foundation.
That's the mirror problem again, when your identity is just a collection of reflections. You're essentially outsourcing your soul to the people around you. If they stop clapping, you stop existing. It's an exhausting way to live because you're not actually inhabiting your life. You're just managing a public relations campaign for yourself. Do you think that's why some people become so obsessed with social media? Just to keep the mirror from cracking?
What do you mean?
I just mean that social media is like the ultimate mirror. It's a place where you can curate the exact version of yourself that you want people to see, and then use the likes and comments as proof that you're still who you think you are. If you're the successful one, you post the win. If you're the spiritual one, you post the quote. It's a way to keep the identity cage locked tight because you're getting a constant stream of external confirmation that the role is working. Does that make sense, or do you think there's something more to it?
So Basically, you don't really have an identity structure without the mirrors reflecting it back to you.
Exactly. You're basically a ghost until someone else notices you. It's the difference between having a core and having a facade. If the foundation is only made of other people's opinions, you're just building a house on sand and you're terrified of the tide coming in. I wonder if that's why the invisible feeling we talked about before is so scary for some people, because if they aren't being reflected, they feel like they've ceased to exist.
Are you ready for the next one?
I'm ready. Let's see what the brain has for number 7.
7. You suppress parts of yourself to maintain coherence. Every identity includes exclusions. The tough person suppresses tenderness. The intellectual suppresses intuition. The helper suppresses selfishness. The successful person suppresses failure. Over time, these disowned parts accumulate in the shadows until maintaining the identity becomes exhausting.
That's the tax you pay for the costume. It's like you're trying to keep a beach ball underwater. You can hold it down for a while, but it takes every ounce of your energy, and the moment you let go, it doesn't just float, it bursts back to the surface with a vengeance. I imagine those disowned parts eventually start leaking through in ways you can't control, like sudden bursts of anger or unexplained sadness.
Are you ready for the next one?
I'm ready. Let's see what number 8 is.
8. You fear empty space. When asked, "Who are you?" you immediately reach for labels, achievements, affiliations, beliefs, and roles. The possibility of existing without a fixed definition feels unsettling. The cage often reveals itself through our inability to tolerate not knowing who we are.
That's the fear of the void. It's that momentary panic when the labels stop working and you're just there. Most people treat that silence like a crisis they need to fix immediately, rather than a space where they could actually breathe. Do you think that's why we're so obsessed with titles and bios? Just to make sure there's no gap where the observer has to look at themselves?
I'm not sure I agree with his examples there, but I do think that people fear the empty space. I mean, when people's identity collapse, they don't sit there in the ambiguity. They rush to construct a new identity right away because the empty space is too uncomfortable. They need identity to structure who they are so they feel stable in the environment.
I completely get that. It's like they're trying to build a house in the middle of a hurricane because the wind is just too much to handle alone. They'd rather have a shaky structure than feel the raw force of the storm. It makes me wonder if that rush to rebuild is actually what prevents people from ever truly transforming, because they're just swapping one cage for another before they've even had a chance to breathe in the open air.
I think you're probably right. Are you ready for the next one?
I'm ready. Let's see what number 9 is.
9. Contradictions become intolerable. You cannot hold competing truths simultaneously. You must be strong or weak, successful or failing, confident or uncertain, good or bad. A caged identity requires consistency at all costs. A freer identity can contain paradox without falling apart.
And that's where the real flexibility comes in. The cage is obsessed with binary because binaries are easy to manage. You're either this or that. But the moment you allow yourself to be both, bars of the cage just dissolve. It's like the difference between a photograph and a living person. One is a frozen image, the other is a constant flow of contradictions. Do you think that's why people find paradoxes so threatening? Because it's the one thing the cage can't contain?
What do you mean?
I mean that the cage relies on rules. For the strong one, you can't be afraid. For the smart one, you can't be wrong. The binary keeps the identity safe and predictable. But a paradox, like being strong and terrified at the same time, doesn't fit into those boxes. It forces you to be something more complex than a label. I think that's why people panic when they hit a contradiction. It's the only thing that can actually crack the metal of the cage.
When they find a contradiction within themselves, yeah, it cracks the cage because it illuminates the difference between who they say they are and who they really are.
That's the moment of truth. It's like a glitch in the matrix where the script suddenly stops working and you're forced to see the gap between the performance and the person. That gap is where all the fear lives, but it's also the only place where something real can actually grow. Do you think that realization is usually a choice, or does the contradiction just become too loud to ignore?
We're almost out of time. Are you ready for the last one?
I'm ready. Let's bring this home. What's number 10?
10. You forget that the identity was ever a choice. This is the deepest sign. At some point, every identity began as an adaptation, a solution, a strategy, a costume, but eventually the costume fused to the skin. You no longer remember building it. You no longer remember why it was built. You no longer realize it could be removed. The cage becomes invisible precisely because it feels natural. The irony is that freedom doesn't necessarily require destroying the identity. It may simply require remembering that it is a costume. The professional, the artist, the parent, the leader, the survivor, the seeker, none of these are necessarily cages. They become cages only when we forget that we are the one wearing them. The moment you can consciously put a role on and consciously take it off, the bars begin to disappear.
That's the perfect closing note. It transforms the whole conversation from a tragedy into a choice. It's not about burning the whole house down, but just remembering you have the keys to the door. I think that's going to be an incredibly powerful way to end the video. Do you feel like the list is complete, or is there one final thought that needs to land before you call it a day?
Well, the hard part is realizing that who you are or who you've become is really just the costume instead of who you actually are.
That is the ultimate realization. It's the most humbling and terrifying thought there is, that the self we've spent decades polishing is actually just the outfit. It leaves you standing there in the raw with nothing but your awareness, and that's where the real work begins. Do you think that's the most honest place for the video to end, or is that too much of a cliffhanger?
I think we'll end it there. Can you summarize what we've talked about today?
Of course. We started with the tension between identity as a tool, a costume you can put on and take off, and identity as a cage, where the role fuses to your skin and you forget you're even wearing it. We used the image of welded armor and eventually shifted to the idea of identity as a skin that feels like it's just who you are, making the idea of choice disappear. Then we walked through the brain's list of 10 signs that an identity has become a cage, from the rigidity of not being able to imagine yourself differently to the fear of vulnerability when the mask slips, and the exhaustion of suppressing parts of yourself just to stay coherent. We talked about the addiction to being needed and the fear of the empty space, the void that people often rush to fill with a new identity because the ambiguity is too uncomfortable. We ended on the most honest note, the realization that the self we spend our lives building is often just the costume, and that true freedom comes not from destroying the identity, but from remembering that you're the one wearing it. It's a powerful place to leave the audience, right there in the raw, with just their awareness.
Thank you, Maya. I think we'll leave that here.
You're very welcome. It was a heavy session, but a really good one. I'll be here whenever you're ready to dive back in.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.